The world exploded into a horrifying kaleidoscope of pain and suffocating panic. One micro-moment, Lily was tracing the intricate veins of a fallen oak leaf with a smooth, cool riverstone, its gray surface a comforting anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. She hummed a low, repetitive thrumming that vibrated in her chest, a self-soothing symphony only she could conduct, lost in the miniature universe of lines and textures. The next an eclipse, a shadow falling fast and hard. Dirt choked Lily, grass scraped, terror gripped. The words were a primal scream trapped in her throat, her small hands flailing, clawing at the vice-like grip on the back of her head. The acrid tang of fertilizer and damp earth filled her nostrils, her mouth a brutal sensory assault that sent her already teetering system into freefall. Stop that infernal racket and act normal for once, you peculiar child. The voice, sharp as shattered glass, was Karen Young's. It sliced through Lily's carefully constructed calm. Then the hand, smelling cloyingly of artificial roses and the sharp, sterile bite of disinfectant, slammed her face into the damp, unforgiving lawn. Eat it. Maybe that will teach you how decent children behave. Lily's lungs burned, a silent, desperate plea. Her world narrowed to the terrifying proximity of crushed green, the suffocating scent of bruised foliage, and the unbearable soul-shattering wrongness of it all. The imprint of grass blades seared her cheek. Dirt gritted between her teeth. When the pressure finally blessedly released, she was left gasping, spluttering a small broken thing on the ground. Karen Young was already striding away, a self-righteous pronouncement about standards and public decency, trailing behind her like a toxic plume. Lily curled into a fetal ball, a high-pitched, wounded keening, finally tearing from her body rocking, trying to expel the violation, the horrifying dissonance of a world that had yet again proven itself unfathomably cruel and terrifyingly unpredictable. Ben Carter, Lily's father, was staring at a crime scene photo, a child's drawing defaced with violent slashes, in his office at the Regional Child Abuse Taskforce headquarters. It was a place where he meticulously pieced together the shattered fragments of young lives, a grim sanctuary where he fought to bring monsters to justice. His phone shrieked, not with his duty ringtone, but the urgent, piercing tone reserved for family. Sarah's name blazed on the screen, a premonition cold and sharp twisted in his gut. Sarah never called him at work unless the sky was falling. Ben, oh thank God you need to come home. Now. It's Lily. And Karen Young. Oh, Ben, she's not breathing right. She's a mess. Sarah's voice was a raw, ragged edge of hysteria, a sound that resonated with Ben's deepest, most primal fears. He was out of his chair before she finished, keys already in his hand, his mind a frantic slideshow of worst-case scenarios. Lily, his precious, brilliant 8-year-old autistic daughter. What happened? Sarah, is Lily hurt? Talk to me. Karen, forced Lily's face into the grass. Ben made her eat it in front of Mrs. Henderson's. Lily's having a total shutdown, covered in dirt. She won't let me near her. Just this awful sound. I found her little gray stone, dropped right there. The mention of the stone. Lily's current favorite grounding object sent a fresh spear of anguish through him. Blood cold as glacial meltwater flooded his veins, followed by a surge of icy rage, so potent it threatened to buckle his knees. His Lily, whose world was a delicate tapestry of intense sensations, intricate routines, and profound sensitivities. This wasn't a neighborhood spat. This was an assault, brutal and degrading. As he sped towards home, the familiar tree-lined streets of their supposedly tranquil suburban enclave, Willow Glen, blurring into an indistinguishable smear of green and beige, one question burned in his mind, stark and brutal. Who could inflict such calculated public humiliation on a vulnerable child, a child whose only crime was experiencing the world differently? And what depraved justification could they possibly harbor? Flashback, 1 year. Prior. The Carter family's life in Willow Glen had been a conscious choice, a meticulously curated sanctuary. Ben, as the battle-hardened leader of a multi-county task force dedicated to investigating and prosecuting the darkest spectrum of child abuse, saw humanity's ugliest facets daily. His home shared with Sarah, a pediatric nurse whose compassion was as boundless as her fierce maternal protectiveness, and their beloved Lily was his respite. A haven where love, patience, and unwavering routine were the pillars of their existence. Lily's autism was not a defect, but a different operating system. She possessed a brilliant, disarmingly literal mind, an astonishing memory for her special interests, currently the migratory patterns of monarch butterflies and the complete schematics of the London Underground, and a unique lens that often revealed the world's hidden, subtle beauties. She also grappled with the labyrinth of social reciprocity, sensory overload that could feel like an internal explosion, and a rigid adherence to routines that formed the scaffolding of her security. Unforeseen changes could trigger tsunamis of anxiety. Unfamiliar sensations or jarring noises could precipitate overwhelming meltdowns. Her communication was a fascinating blend, precise, almost formal language interspersed with echolalia when stressed, or periods of profound non-verbal withdrawal. Stimming, rocking hand flapping, or her favorite soft melodic humming was her innate, beautiful way of regulating her emotions and processing the overwhelming sensory data of the world. Ben and Sarah had immersed themselves in understanding Lily's world, working tirelessly with therapists, educators, and Lily herself. They built a supportive framework, advocating fiercely for her needs, while gently, patiently encouraging her to navigate a world not always designed or willing to accommodate her. Willow Glen, with its reputation for good schools and a quiet, family-centric atmosphere, had seemed like the perfect canvas. They had hoped for acceptance, or at the very least, a benign tolerance. The first discordant note in their Willow Glen symphony had come predictably from Karen Young. Mrs. Young, whose perfectly manicured, unnervingly symmetrical lawn was a veritable extension of her rigid, unyielding personality, was the self-appointed warden of Willow Glen's social norms and the vociferously omnipresent president of the Homeowners Association. Her initial complaints were delivered with a saccharine smile that never quite reached her cold, appraising eyes. She'd cornered Sarah at the community mailbox, commenting on Lily's rather unusual intensity when she'd excitedly shared butterfly facts with another child or the somewhat distracting little noises Lily sometimes made while playing in their own fenced backyard, a clear, pointed reference to Lily's happy, self-regulatory humming. It's just that some of the other children and their parents find it a bit unsettling. Dear, Karen had purred, her tone dripping with a cloying false concern that set Sarah's teeth on edge. We wouldn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable now, would we? Sarah, ever polite but steel-spined, had calmly explained that Lily's humming was a harmless, joyful form of self-expression and a vital tool for managing her sensory environment. Karen had simply offered that tight, knowing smile again. Well, as long as it doesn't become a disturbance. Ben, his professional instincts honed by years of seeing microaggressions escalate into overt abuse, advised Sarah to document everything. He hadn't anticipated the velocity or viciousness of the escalation. He remembered Karen during an early HOA, welcome to the neighborhood gathering, holding a framed photograph of a cherubic blonde child not her own. Her gaze had lingered on Lily, who was quietly observing the patterns in the tablecloth. Karen's voice when she spoke to a nearby resident had been low, but Ben's hearing was sharp. They demand so much, Karen had murmured, her eyes on the photo, then flicking to Lily, and they can destroy everything if you let them. Everything. At the time, Ben had dismissed it as an odd, vaguely unsettling comment. Now it echoed with a more sinister resonance. Then there was Mr. Baxter, their immediate neighbor to the left. A retired accountant, perpetually grumpy, whose prized rose bushes were his singular obsession. He'd once shouted over the fence at Lily, who had been humming particularly loudly while swinging, "Can't you keep that child quiet? Some of us are trying to have some peace." Sarah had intervened a tense exchange, ensuing about noise ordinances and common decency. Baxter had grumbled about undisciplined children and retreated. A minor irritation, Ben had thought, but another data point in the neighborhood's less than welcoming undercurrent. The first direct confrontation with Karen Young had occurred about a month before the horrifying grass incident. Lily, in her element, was joyfully, meticulously lining up her collection of smooth, colorful stones along the edge of their driveway, a calming, repetitive ritual she adored. Karen Young, power walking past in aggressively bright sportswear, her expression a mask of disapproval, stopped dead. "Sarah," She barked her voice sharp enough to make Lily flinch, violently dropping a prized piece of sea glass. Sarah appeared at the door. "Mrs. Young, is there a problem?" Karen gestured towards Lily and her carefully curated stone patterns with a look of profound distaste. "This display, it's rather unsightly, isn't it? And she's making those odd little humming sounds again. It's not normal. It reflects poorly on the entire neighborhood. I've had complaints." Lily, acutely sensitive to tone and disapproval, despite her social communication challenges, began to look distressed, her humming growing louder, more agitated, a clear sign of rising anxiety. Sarah stepped protectively in front of her daughter. "Mrs. Young, Lily is playing quietly on our own property. Her stones are harming absolutely no one, and her humming is not a disturbance. It's how she expresses happiness and regulates herself." Karen's eyes narrowed into icy slits. "Happiness. It looks like a symptom of something that needs to be controlled. This is a family neighborhood, Sarah, and we expect a certain level of decorum. If you can't manage your daughter's peculiarities, perhaps this isn't the right environment for her." The thinly veiled threat, the blatant venomous ableism, struck Sarah like a physical blow. "Are you actually suggesting my autistic daughter isn't welcome in this neighborhood because she doesn't conform to your ludicrously narrow definition of normal?" Sarah's voice trembled with barely suppressed fury. Karen sniffed a picture of disdain. "I'm suggesting that all residents have a right to peace and quiet, and to not have their property values diminished by unseemly behavior. You'd do well to remember that for Lily's sake." She then pivoted sharply and resumed her power walk, leaving Sarah shaking with rage and Lily on the precipice of a full-blown meltdown from the sudden hostile invasion of her safe space. The hostility metastasized rapidly. A week later, an anonymous typed note appeared in their mailbox. "Fit in or leave. Some people don't belong here." Ben had felt a chill. It was unsigned, untraceable, but the sentiment felt chillingly familiar. He installed a discreet security camera overlooking their front yard and driveway, his unease growing. The annual neighborhood Easter egg hunt, an event Karen Young orchestrated with the precision of a military campaign and lorded over with tyrannical zeal, became the stage for an act of deliberate social bullying. Lily, with her exceptional eye for detail and pattern recognition, was surprisingly adept at finding eggs, though her joy lay in the methodical discovery and arrangement, not the competitive frenzy. As the hunt commenced, Karen Young, with a smile that was a grotesque caricature of politeness, physically blocked Lily's path. "Oh, Lily, dear," she cooed, her voice carrying clearly to nearby parents. "Perhaps it's best if you let the other children have a proper chance this year. Your methods are a bit unconventional, and we wouldn't want any unfortunate meltdowns over misplaced eggs, would we?" She then gently but firmly steered a confused and deeply wounded Lily towards a desolate corner of the park, effectively excommunicating her from the activity. Several parents witnessed the exchange, their expressions ranging from uncomfortable discomfort to mild, quickly suppressed disapproval. No one intervened. Lily, overwhelmed by the public rejection, had simply shut down, refusing to participate, her small shoulders slumped in a posture of utter dejection. Sarah had taken her home, her heart a crucible of aching sorrow for her daughter's pain and white-hot fury at Karen's calculated cruelty. Next came the official HOA violation letter penned by Karen Young in her capacity as president. It cited persistent and disruptive atypical vocalizations emanating from the Carter property, Lily's humming, and the creation of an aesthetically unpleasing environment through the repeated, unapproved arrangement of landscape debris on private property, Lily's beloved stone patterns. The letter demanded immediate cessation of these disruptive behaviors and removal of all unsightly personal arrangements, threatening escalating fines and further community action for non-compliance. It was a blatant, unambiguous attempt to intimidate them into suppressing Lily's autistic traits, to forcibly remold her into a neurotypical shape she could never and should never have to inhabit. Ben, drawing on his legal knowledge, had drafted a scathing, meticulously referenced response, citing federal and state disability discrimination laws and threatening a lawsuit if the harassment continued. He knew, however, that legal documents wouldn't penetrate Karen Young's armor of prejudice or dent her messianic determination to enforce her twisted vision of neighborhood perfection. She was a bully, a predator of difference, and Lily was her designated prey. This horrifying pattern of escalating aggression, this undeniable animus, now painted the scene at Mrs. Henderson's lawn with an undeniable brush of premeditated malice. End flashback. When Ben burst through his front door, the scene was more chaotic and heartbreaking than Sarah's frantic call had conveyed. Lily was in the living room, huddled in her favorite weighted blanket in the farthest corner, rocking with a frightening, almost violent intensity. A low guttural moan, a sound of pure, unadulterated anguish, tore from her throat. Her face, usually so bright and expressive, was a mask of terror, streaked with tears and caked with dirt. A raw, angry abrasion already turning a deep, ugly red marked her left cheek where the unforgiving grass had scraped her tender skin. Sarah knelt a few feet away, her face, a portrait of helpless agony, murmuring soft, soothing words, but Lily was unreachable, lost in the terrifying depths of a severe autistic meltdown. The sight of his vibrant, usually joyful daughter, reduced to this state of abject terror, ignited a cold, hard fury in Ben, a chillingly familiar sensation he recognized from the most egregious, soul-destroying abuse cases he'd investigated. But this was not an anonymous case file. This was his child, his Lily. Mrs. Henderson, their elderly, kind-hearted next-door neighbor, was in the kitchen clutching a cup of tea with trembling hands, her face pale and etched with profound distress. Ben, it was barbaric, she whispered, her voice cracking. I saw the whole thing from my window. I was watching the robins. Karen Young. She was screaming at poor Lily something about being normal, then she grabbed her by the hair and shoved her face right into my lawn. Lily was so frightened. I shouted at Karen, told her to leave that precious child alone, but she just shot me this awful glare and stormed off muttering about standards. I called Sarah immediately. Ben listened, his jaw tightening until it ached, his mind already shifting into investigator mode. He gently excused himself and went to Lily. He knelt beside her, not touching, not yet. He just existed in her space, a steadfast presence, and began to hum. It was a soft, familiar tune, a simple melody they often shared, one that usually eventually pierced through her distress and anchored her back to safety. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Lily's violent rocking began to subside, the guttural moans softening to whimpers, then to ragged, hiccuping breaths. He stayed with her, his heart a shattered thing in his chest, until the tempest of her meltdown finally passed, leaving her exhausted, limp, and heartbreakingly small in his arms. Only then did he allow himself to fully process Mrs. Henderson's words. An eyewitness. A credible, horrified eyewitness. And a victim whose physical and emotional trauma screamed of the cruelty of the act. Later that evening, after Lily, heavily sedated by exhaustion and residual terror, had finally drifted into a restless, twitching sleep, Ben sat with Sarah at their kitchen table. The ambient sounds of their home, usually comforting, felt alien and intrusive. The official investigator part of his brain, the part he usually walled off from his personal life, took cold, methodical control. I need a detailed formal statement from Mrs. Henderson. He said, his voice quiet but resonant, with an unshakable firmness. I need to document Lily's injuries meticulously, photographs, measurements, her emotional state, the regression, everything. Sarah, this isn't just a case of a neighborhood bully with a vendetta. What Karen Young did to Lily today in broad daylight is child abuse, physical assault, emotional battery, and I swear to you, I'm going to make damn sure she answers for it. Sarah nodded, fresh tears streaming down her pale face. I can't comprehend it, Ben. How could anyone be so deliberately cruel to her just because she's different? Ben reached across the table, his hand engulfing hers. There are people in this world, Sarah, who are terrified by difference, who see it as a threat, an affront to their own narrow, brittle view of how things should be. Karen Young is one of them, a particularly virulent strain, but she picked the wrong family to mess with. She picked the wrong child to target. The next day, Ben, acutely aware of the need to navigate jurisdictional boundaries and potential conflicts of interest, officially liaised with the local Willow Glen Police Department. He acted not as a grieving, furious father, though that inferno raged within him, but as a seasoned professional investigator offering his expertise. He formally interviewed Mrs. Henderson, whose account was clear, detailed, and damning. He meticulously documented Lily's abrasion, the grass stains embedded in her clothes, the lingering dirt under her fingernails. With Sarah's tearful assistance, he chronicled the significant heartbreaking regression in Lily's behavior, her heightened anxiety, a visceral fear of going outside, even into their own backyard, renewed struggles with sleep, her verbal communication almost entirely ceasing, replaced by whimpers or the agitated echolalia he hadn't heard in years. This was all crucial, undeniable evidence of the profound harm inflicted. He reviewed the footage from his own security camera. It caught Karen Young striding purposefully towards Mrs. Henderson's property, her expression grim just moments before the assault. It didn't capture the act itself, the angle was wrong, but it established her presence and intent. He walked the perimeter of Mrs. Henderson's lawn, his eyes scanning for anything. Near a rose bush, something glinted, a pair of discarded gardening gloves, slightly muddy, the kind with reinforced fingertips. He recognized them. Mr. Baxter's. He'd seen Baxter wearing identical ones countless times while tending his precious roses. A cold knot formed in Ben's stomach. Baxter had complained about Lily's noise. Had he been involved, an accomplice, or was this a horrifying coincidence? He bagged the gloves, his mind racing. Then came the call that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of the case. It was from another neighbor, Mr. Davies, a quiet, unassuming retired librarian who often sat on his porch, a keen bird watcher. "Shh, Captain Carter." Mr. Davies began his voice, hesitant, laced with a nervous tremor. Ben hadn't used his old police rank in years, but some in the neighborhood still remembered it. I saw what happened to your little girl yesterday at Mrs. Henderson's, and I happened to be recording the robins at my bird bath. My phone, it was on a little tripod. I think I might have inadvertently caught some of it." Ben's heart hammered against his ribs. "Mr. Davies, can I come over?" "Right now." Mr. Davies's hands trembled visibly as he queued up the footage on his smartphone. The video was shaky, partially obscured by a large lilac bush, but what it showed was horrifyingly, damningly clear. Karen Young, towering over Lily, who was crouched by the edge of the lawn. Karen's voice, sharp and angry, was chillingly audible even over the chirping of the birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower. Absolutely disgraceful. Act like a normal child for once in your miserable life. Then the unmistakable, brutal image of Karen grabbing Lily by the back of her head, forcing her downwards out of the frame towards the grass. Lily's small, terrified cry, a sound that would haunt Ben's nightmares for years, was stark and raw. The footage didn't capture the eating grass part directly due to the angle and the obstruction of the lilac bush, but it unequivocally showed the initial assault, the unprovoked aggression, Karen's furious, contorted demeanor, and Lily's utter helplessness. It was irrefutable. I couldn't stop recording Ben." Mr. Davies stammered, his face pale. "It happened so fast. I yelled, but she was already..." And then Mrs. Henderson was shouting. But there was more. As Ben replayed the crucial segment frame by agonizing frame, something else caught his eye. Just as Karen shoved Lily down, something small and white fluttered from Karen's pocket or hand landing near where Lily fell. It was almost invisible. Ben zoomed in, his blood running cold. It looked like a small folded piece of paper. He thanked Mr. Davies profusely, his mind a whirlwind. He immediately returned to Mrs. Henderson's lawn, now a contaminated crime scene in his eyes. He searched frantically near where Lily had been, and there, tucked under a clump of plantain almost invisible against the soil, was a small folded piece of cheap notebook paper. He carefully opened it with gloved hands. 4 words typed in the same font as the anonymous note they'd received weeks ago: "Be normal or leave." This wasn't just an impulsive act of rage. This was premeditated. This was a threat, a terrifying personal message delivered with unspeakable cruelty. Ben felt a grim, chilling satisfaction mixed with the fresh wave of horror. He now had irrefutable visual corroboration of the assault and physical evidence of ongoing escalating harassment. He then recalled something else from the video, a fleeting moment just before Karen grabbed Lily. Karen seemed to spray something from a small unmarked bottle onto the patch of grass, where she would then shove Lily's face. At the time, watching it in Mr. and Davy's living room, he'd been too focused on the assault itself. Now, with the note with the gloves, with everything it screamed of something more sinister. He carefully took a sample of the grass and soil from that exact spot, bagging it for later analysis. The artificial rose scent on Karen's hand, noted by Lily during the assault and relayed through Sarah. Could it be connected to an irritant? His investigation into Karen Young's past, conducted through discreet channels available to him, began to unearth a deeply buried tragedy. Years ago, Karen had been the primary caregiver for a younger sister with profound developmental disabilities. An accident, a moment of lapsed supervision during a period of intense stress for Karen, had resulted in the sister's death. The community at the time had been divided, some sympathetic, others whispering of neglect. Karen had been investigated, though ultimately cleared of criminal wrongdoing. But the trauma, the guilt, the public scrutiny, and perhaps a deeply twisted resentment had clearly festered. The faded photo, she sometimes looked at the one Ben had glimpsed. It was her sister. Her comment, "They destroy everything," suddenly took on a horrifying personal clarity. Lily, with her autism, her peculiarities, had become the focus of Karen's unresolved grief and pathological rage, a scapegoat for a pain she couldn't otherwise exercise. The discovery of Baxter's gloves still nagged at him. Could Baxter be involved in the harassment, even if not the physical assault, or was Karen trying to frame him too? The complexity was nauseating. The HOA was already a hornet's nest. News of the incident, ignited by Mrs. Henderson's indignant, detailed account to several other horrified neighbors, had spread like wildfire. An emergency HOA meeting was called by several board members, aghast at the allegations against their president. Karen Young, however, remained defiantly ensconced in her self-righteousness. She issued a terse statement through the HOA secretary, vehemently denying any wrongdoing, claiming she had merely been firmly redirecting a child who was behaving erratically and potentially damaging private property, and that the accusations were an absurdly overblown reaction from oversensitive, permissive parents seeking to excuse their child's lack of discipline. The evening of the meeting, just as Ben and Sarah were about to leave, Ben's phone buzzed. An unknown number. A text message. "Stop pushing this, or Lily suffers more. We know where you live." Ben's blood turned to ice. We. Was Karen not acting alone? Was Baxter involved in this threat, or someone else? He showed it to Sarah, whose face went ashen. "We have to go." "Ben," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "We can't let them silence us." The community hall was packed to the air, thick with a volatile cocktail of tension, anger, and morbid curiosity. Karen Young sat at the head table, her expression a carefully constructed mask of martyred innocence, flanked by a smirking, sycophantic crony who served as HOA treasurer and was known for his blind loyalty. When the floor was opened for discussion of the unfortunate incident involving Lily Carter, Ben rose to speak. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet intensity, the palpable authority honed by years of confronting abusers and navigating hostile courtrooms, filled the cavernous room, silencing the murmurs. He calmly, methodically, and devastatingly recounted the events not as a grieving, enraged father, but as an investigator meticulously laying out an unassailable edifice of facts. He described Lily's autism, her inherent vulnerability, her gentle nature. He detailed Karen Young's documented pattern of escalating harassment, referencing the previous complaints, the Easter egg hunt incident, the threatening HOA letter, and the anonymous "fit in or leave" note. He then described the assault itself, his words painting a vivid, disturbing, and utterly damning picture of calculated cruelty. Karen Young interrupted, her voice, shrill, cracking the facade of composure. "This is slander, an outrageous fabrication. That child was completely out of control. She was deliberately tearing up Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias. I simply guided her away firmly to prevent further destruction." Several neighbors murmured, some looking uncertain, swayed perhaps by Karen's forceful denial or their own discomfort with conflict. Mr. Baxter, seated near the back, looked distinctly uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Ben paused, letting her outburst hang in the stale air. He then looked directly at Karen Young, his gaze like a surgeon's scalpel. Mrs. Young, are you categorically denying that you physically grabbed my 8-year-old daughter by her head and forcibly shoved her face into the grass? Are you denying that you screamed at her to act normal and eat it? Of course I deny it. It's a preposterous, malicious lie. Karen snapped her composure, visibly fraying a flush, rising on her neck. Ben nodded slowly. I see. He then turned to the board member operating the projector. If you would, please. The lights in the hall dimmed. Mr. Davies' cell phone footage, raw and unedited, filled the large screen. The shaky video, the harsh, unmistakable sound of Karen's voice. Act like a normal child for once in your miserable life. Lily's small, terrified cry. It silenced the room. Gasps, sharp and horrified, rippled through the assembled crowd. The image of Karen Young, a figure of supposed community leadership, towering menacingly over his small, vulnerable daughter. Then the brutal, unmistakable act of grabbing her and forcing her down. It was visceral, undeniable, and utterly damning. When the lights came back up, Karen Young's face was a mottled patchwork of red and white. Her smirking crony looked stunned into slack-jawed silence. Several board members appeared physically ill. The collective gasp had been replaced by a stunned, horrified silence. That, Ben said, his voice now like ice shearing through the silence, is not firmly redirecting. That is assault. That is aggravated harassment. That is child abuse. And under state law, Title 18, Section 2702, it is a felony prosecutable offense. He paused, then added, furthermore, forensic analysis of the grass sample taken from the site of the assault, the grass my daughter was forced into, revealed the presence of a concentrated oleoresin capsicum irritant, pepper spray, deliberately applied moments before. The note, "Be normal or leave," found at the scene matches the typography of previous anonymous threats. Just then, as if summoned by the weight of the evidence, 2 uniformed police officers entered the hall, accompanied by a plainclothes detective Ben knew from the local precinct, Detective Miller. They walked purposefully silently towards Karen Young. Suddenly, Karen lunged from her seat. "You're all against me. You're framing me." She shrieked, her eyes wild, making a desperate bolt for the side exit. But the officers were faster, intercepting her before she reached the door. Detective Miller addressed her calmly, his voice cutting through her hysterical denials. "Karen Young, you are under arrest for aggravated assault, felony, child abuse, and witness intimidation. You have the right to remain silent." Karen erupted, screaming about conspiracies, about disrespectful children, about her rights being violated, her carefully constructed persona shattering into a million ugly pieces. But her protests were drowned out by the shocked, appalled silence of the community and the decisive metallic click of handcuffs. Amidst the commotion, Mr. Baxter approached Ben, his face pale and sweating. "Captain Carter, Ben, I have to confess. I did yell at Lily about her humming a few weeks back. And those gloves, they're mine. I was gardening earlier that day near Mrs. Henderson's, and I must have dropped them. But I swear on my life, I never touched your daughter. I was annoyed by the noise. I'm so sorry." His confession, though minor in the grand scheme, seemed to lance a boil of guilt, and oddly, it helped solidify the community's horror at what Karen had done, contrasting petty annoyance with profound malice. Ben looked at the stunned faces around him, faces that had once been indifferent, or perhaps silently disapproving of Lily. Now they were filled with shock, shame, and a dawning understanding. She hurt my daughter." Ben said, his voice clear and unwavering, addressing not just the board but the entire community. "She did it because Lily is different. Now you all have a choice. You can choose to look away, or you can choose justice, and you can choose to make this community a place where no child, no person, is ever targeted for who they are." The arrest of Karen Young was a seismic shock to Willow Glen, but it was only the beginning of a long, arduous legal battle. Ben, leveraging his intimate knowledge of the criminal justice system, ensured that the prosecution team had every meticulously documented piece of evidence, every witness statement, every expert opinion they needed. Lily's pediatrician and her dedicated therapist provided crucial, heartbreaking testimony about the profound physical and emotional trauma she had suffered, the significant regression in her development, the pervasive fear that now haunted her waking hours and infiltrated her dreams. The video footage, coupled with Mrs. Henderson's and Mr. Davies's unwavering testimonies, the analysis of the irritant-laced grass, the typed note, and the revelation of Karen's tragic, twisted history formed an irrefutable case. Karen Young's attempts to portray herself as a misunderstood victim, a beleaguered pillar of the community, merely trying to maintain order in the face of unruly elements, crumbled under the sheer damning weight of evidence, detailing her calculated escalating cruelty and her deeply pathological motivations. She was found guilty on all counts: aggravated assault, felony child abuse, and witness intimidation. The judge, in sentencing her to a significant prison term, followed by mandatory intensive psychiatric treatment, anger management, and sensitivity training, spoke scathingly of her appalling abuse of authority, her deliberate, malicious, and predatory targeting of a uniquely vulnerable child, and her utter lack of remorse. A subsequent civil suit, hard-fought but ultimately successful, resulted in a substantial damages award placed securely in a trust for Lily's ongoing therapy, specialized educational needs, and her future security. Willow Glen itself underwent a profound transformative reckoning. The existing HOA board was summarily dissolved, and a new one was elected comprised of members genuinely committed to fostering an inclusive, empathetic, and supportive community. Workshops on neurodiversity, disability awareness, and anti-bullying initiatives were organized, well attended by residents now acutely aware of their collective blind spots. Neighbors who had once been silent, or who had perhaps looked away in discomfort, now reached out to the Carters, offering heartfelt apologies, tangible support, and genuine, newly forged friendship. The change was palpable, a quiet revolution of conscience. Lily's journey to recovery was long, winding, and arduous. There were significant setbacks, days when the shadows of that traumatic afternoon would creep back suffocating and cold, when her fear of the outside world of strangers, of being misunderstood or targeted, would overwhelm her fragile, hard-won progress. But slowly, painstakingly, with the unwavering, unconditional love of her parents, the skilled, compassionate guidance of her therapist, and the newfound, unexpected warmth and acceptance of her transformed community, Lily began to heal. The vibrant, intelligent spark in her extraordinary eyes, once dulled by shock and terror, began to return, flickering, then burning steadily brighter. Her happy, melodic humming, once a target of Karen Young's vitriolic scorn, gradually, tentatively, then more confidently, filled their home again, a resilient, beautiful melody of survival and reclamation. One sun-drenched afternoon, many months later, Ben watched from the porch swing. His heart ached with a fierce, tender protectiveness. Lily, holding Sarah's hand tightly, ventured out to the small, unassuming patch of grass in front of Mrs. Henderson's house, the place where her world had shattered. She knelt, not with fear this time, but with a flicker of her old, quiet curiosity, and gently, reverently touched a small, resilient daisy that had pushed its way through the soil. She looked up at Ben, a small, tentative smile gracing her lips, a smile that spoke volumes of unimaginable courage, of trust, painstakingly rediscovered, of a small girl bravely, defiantly reclaiming her world, one blade of grass, one daisy at a time. She then reached into her pocket and pulled out her favorite smooth gray stone, the one she'd dropped that day. She held it out to Ben. "For you, Daddy. It's a safe stone." Sarah squeezed Ben's arm, her eyes shining. "She's our butterfly, Ben, stronger than anyone knows." The darkness had been confronted, and dragged into the unforgiving light. And though the scars, both visible and invisible, remained, they were no longer just testament to her vulnerability. They were badges of her incredible, indomitable strength, and enduring symbols of a father's relentless, unwavering fight for justice for his child. Later, inside their home, Ben saw Lily carefully tracing the complex lines of her beloved London Underground map spread out on the living room floor. She'd once drawn a simplified version for him, a treasured gift he kept pinned above his desk at work, a reminder of her unique brilliance. Seeing her re-engage with it, her humming a soft counterpoint to the scratching of her crayon, was a profound relief. He remembered a terrifying incident years ago when Lily, overwhelmed at a crowded museum, had briefly slipped away from them. The sheer panic of those few minutes, the fear of not being able to protect her, had been a cold premonition. That fear had been reawakened by Karen Young, but now it was tempered by a fierce, proven resolve. He knelt beside her. No one will ever hurt you like that again, Butterfly. He whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I promise. Duh. Lily looked up, her gaze clear and direct. Daddy? She said, her voice small but firm. I want my other stones. Can we line them up outside tomorrow? The sound of Lily's laughter, when it finally came again, weeks after that, clear and uninhibited, as she chased the monarch butterfly in their own backyard, the sun catching the gold in her hair, was the most beautiful, most triumphant sound Ben Carter had ever heard. It was a powerful, enduring echo of hope, a testament to resilience and the sweetest, most profound kind of justice.